Ye Shunguang cuts through UCC like a knife through butter, and so she does with quite literally every single other boss in the entire game. Okay, to be fair, the pre-skill was with 39 substats because I ran out of time and was stuck at 59k scores for a majority of my tries, and the new boss has a massive 216 million HP, so that thing is not dying anytime soon, at least not without Mindscape, and not to me that is. Point being, either Ye Shunguang is incredibly broken, or we are really good at editing. Well, both of these are true, and so are the kills. This video will be very long, so get yourself a tea or coffee and settle on, because this video will be overloaded with everything you need to know about Ye Shunguang.
I am Ye Shunguang, wielder of the Qingming Sword of Yunque Summit.
Ye Shunguang is the second Void Hunter to join our ranks, and with that she also brings her own new element, Honed Edge, which is a cooler looking blue tinted recolor of physical. But we have a lot to cover, so let's get started and talk about Honed Edge. Honed Edge is a variation of the physical element, and its unique property is that all Honed Edge damage dealt has a 50% increased miasma purification. Means Ye Shunguang shreds miasma shields very quickly. Aside from that, it has its own anomaly build-up bar, can disorder with the regular physical assault build-up, and that is pretty much about it. When triggering Honed Edge, it behaves exactly like triggering a physical anomaly would. It will proc assault and also inflict flinch for 10 seconds, which increases enemy days taken by 10%. However, contrary to Miyabi and Yizhuan, who always deal frost and auric ink damage respectively, Ye Shunguang only deals Honed Edge damage while she is in her enlightened mind state. We will cover what that is just shortly. Outside of said state, she deals regular physical damage, but she cannot build any physical anomaly. This is not too important, as we will see later, but I think it is worth a mention. Having now covered her special sub-element, before we continue with her kit, I want to clarify that she has a lot of skills, and also a lot of word in her kits. But her gameplay is extremely simple and really just boils down to press basic attack and hold EX special. So please do not be discouraged by the sheer amount of words and skills she has in her kit. While we will go through all of her relevant skills and how they link together, you will also find timestamps to the respective summary screens in the timeline and description, and frankly, if you want to save yourself a little bit of time, just watch those instead. However, as per usual, I will throw in some important bits of information about her skills throughout the kit overview, so if you're interested in those, well, you will have to watch it. First up, Ye Shunguang has two states. Her normal state, during which she deals physical damage, and her enlightened mind state, during which all damage dealt by her becomes Honed Edge damage. Because Ye Shunguang does effectively no damage outside of the enlightened mind state, that also means her entire game plan revolves around being inside said state as much as possible. Is that a phone I hear ringing here? This leaves us with two questions. What does the enlightened mind state do, and how do we get into the enlightened mind state? Let's first answer what the enlightened mind state even does. During the enlightened mind state, Ye Shunguang gains access to her enlightened skills, which will also replace most of her abilities. Secondly, when entering the enlightened mind state, she will then activate Ether Veil Verdict, then deactivate it again when leaving said state. While Ether Veil Verdict is active, the enemy's stun damage multiplier becomes disabled, and instead enemies are inflicted with Veil Vulnerability. The in-game description can be very convoluted, so let's simplify things a little bit. What Veil Vulnerability does is it takes the enemy's stun damage multiplier and makes it apply outside of said stun window. This effectively means that while Ye Shunguang is inside the Enlightened mind state, she will always deal damage as if the enemy was stunned. There is a catch though. This Veil Vulnerability multiplier is kept at 210%. For the sake of better understanding this, let's take Miasma Priest as an example. When she is stunned, she has a stun damage multiplier of 150%, so when Veil Vulnerability is activated, Ye Shunguang will be doing 150% damage even out of stun. So if Dialin applies her 30% stun damage multiplier buff, then even though the enemy isn't stunned yet, it will go up to 180%. On Thrall, the default stun damage multiplier is 200%, so that is the bonus applied by Veil Vulnerability. The catch is that his stage mechanic can increase it by 30% up to 230%, but remember, this ability caps out at 210%. So no matter how much of his stage mechanic you build, or if you have applied Dialin stun damage multiplier increase to him, or whatever other sources of stun damage increase there are, Veil Vulnerability cannot go above 210%. This means that it is possible to waste these bonuses, as if it is too high, it won't actually do anything. Because of that, at Mindscapes 0 and with Dialin, Ye Shunguang excels in fights where the highest base stun damage multiplier is 180% or below. Again, this is due to Dialin providing a 30% stun damage multiplier, hence capping out at 210%. Lastly, the Enlightened mind state lasts for 16 seconds, and while in the state, Ye Shunguang does not really have energy. Instead, her energy bar is replaced by a bar that ticks down, indicating effectively how much time you have left. And that is everything the Enlightened mind state does. It makes attacks behave as if they are hitting a stunned enemy, and she gains access to her Enlightened skills. Next, knowing that, Ye Shunguang also gains an inherent 30% crit rate and 25% damage bonus when in battle. Adding the 5% base crit rate every agent has, as well as the 14.4% crit rate from her talent levels to this, Ye Shunguang has a base crit rate of 49.4% at all times. So, let's go back to the Enlightened mind state and let's answer, how do we enter the Enlightened mind state? That is a great question, but we first need to cover her 3 unique resources to even answer it. Qingming Sword Force, which I will refer simply to as Sword Force, Bearer, indicated as a buff icon below her HP bar, and this little bar here that has no name, so I will refer to it as Resource Points. When outside of the Enlightened mind state, Ye Shunguang's basic attacks, dodge counter, and a specific interaction with her special, more on that later, will accumulate resource points. If the bar is full, these resource points will then be converted into 1 Sword Force stack. Said Sword Force has a maximum cap of 6, and if you were to obtain excess stacks, you will gain 1 point of Bearer instead. Again indicated below her HP bar with this little icon. It is important to mention that while she can convert excess Sword Force stacks into Bearer, if she is at full stacks or in her Enlightened mind state, she cannot generate any of her resource points. Bearer has a cap of 3 points, and when exiting the Enlightened mind state, they will be converted into Qingming Sword Force at a 1:1 ratio. If Ye Shunguang has 6 Sword Forces, the next time she is switched in, or if we hold her basic attack button, she will then enter the Enlightened mind state. After entering the Enlightened mind state, her game plan then revolves around spending said Qingming Sword Forces until it is depleted. In addition to gaining Sword Force from her resource points, Ye Shunguang can also acquire it from her additional ability, First Ultimate and EX Special. Ye Shunguang requires either a support or defense agent, and if that condition is met, whenever any ally activates any Ether Veil, Ye Shunguang will gain 3 Sword Force. Here's a table on how many resource points and Sword Force each skill accumulates, pause if you need to. Having all that said, let's talk about her skills she can use while outside of the Enlightened mind state. First, holding down her basic attack button will cast her Sword Waves, and we will literally never use this, so we forget it exists. Otherwise, she features a 4-part basic attack string, and after her basic 4, if we continue with her string, we are forced into her dash attack. Said dash attack will then lead back into her basic 2, so it effectively just replaces her basic 1, and because it generates less resource points than her B1 does, this is technically not great, but we don't really have a choice. We will actively use her regular basic attack string as a filler to accumulate resource points to get back into the Enlightened mind state, but aside from that, they are really just basic attacks and do also what basic attacks are supposed to do. Next up, while outside of the Enlightened mind state, at the cost of 60 energy, Ye Shunguang can cast her EX special, which honestly has a pretty high multiplier, but also grants 1 Sword Force on cast. It also has a really long animation, so ideally, in most cases at least, we want to swap cancel it. However, it also leads directly into her basic 4, which can be a quick and fast way to generate more resource points, which can primarily be important in the beginning of a fight. She also features a special attack that will always consume 1 dodge chance if available, that being the amount of dodges you can do before it goes on cooldown, and also always trigger 1 dodge. If said dodge then triggers a perfect dodge, its damage multiplier will massively increase, generate a large amounts of resource points, and can also directly be followed up with her basic 2. I really like personally how this is designed. Because it will always consume a dodge chance, it can punish you for using it incorrectly, but when used right, it will be a superior choice over her dodge counter, generating more resource points while also dealing similar damage. Ye Shunguang has a dash attack as we already mentioned, and that does what a dash attack is supposed to do and leads into her basic 2. We are forced to use this after her basic 4, so we will do so. She also has aforementioned dodge counter, which has a really generous motion value and generates also some resource points, but otherwise behaves as we would expect a dodge counter to behave. Lastly, she can ride her sword case. No real practical application mid-combat, but I guess it looks nice. Outside the state, she features 1 assist follow-up, defensive assist and quick assist as we would expect, and they also behave as we would expect them to. So aside from her quick assist, we won't cover them any further. That being because she has not 1, but 2 quick assists. The first quick assist behaves as we would a quick assist expect to behave, but it does not generate any resource points and also leads into her basic 2. The second quick assist is technically an entry skill and also labeled as such. Basically Withering Wave's intro skills if you are familiar with that. If switched into her while she has 6 Sword Force, she will then automatically cast her entry skill instead, deal a good chunk of damage and enter the Enlightened mind state. If she is on field, we can manually trigger this by simply holding down her basic attack button. I will talk more about this in the addendums as it will become important when looking at Astral Voice, Astra and also Starlight Engine. Ye Shunguang also has a chain attack outside of her Enlightened mind state and it generates us 0.25 resource points, but for ideal damage output, we do prefer to use her Enlightened state chain attack. More on this later. When at 3000 decibels, she can then use her ultimate. It will deal a great chunk of damage, grants her instantly 6 Qingming Sword Force and also has her enter the Enlightened mind state right away. Having all that said, let's summarize her out of Enlightened mind state gameplay. We use her basic attack, dash attack, dodge counter or special dodge as well as her EX special to generate Sword Force. When we are at 6 Sword Force stacks, we either switch into her or hold her basic attack button to enter the Enlightened mind state. We can also simply use her ultimate to instantly gain 6 Swords Force stacks and enter the Enlightened mind state that way. Make sure to only do this, however, when you have 3 or less current Sword Forces to not waste any stacks. Fortunately for us, we will be most of the time inside of the Enlightened mind state, and that also means we do not get to use her out-of-state skills too much, albeit occasionally we do. Because of how her Val vulnerability works and the fact that we only have it during the Enlightened mind state, she does not really deal remarkable damage outside of it anyway. Before we can cover her skills, we have to clarify that Ye Shunguang has 2 stances during her Enlightened mind state: Grounded and Airborne. Different parts of her kit can only be used when she is grounded, and some can only be used while airborne. Additionally, certain skills will have you switch between those 2 stances, and swapping between them is also key to her combos. After entering the Enlightened mind state or after using her chain attack during said state, Ye Shunguang will become airborne. She has a unique basic attack string while she is in the air, which can be split into 2 parts. The first is a singular slash and can only ever be done right after her entry skill or ultimate. In other words, this can only ever happen once per state, and that is when she first enters it. The second part is then a double strike, which can be used as often as Ye Shunguang goes airborne. That doesn't mean that it can be looped, however, as doing it once, pressing basic will lead into another skill: Sunderlight Annihilation. Annihilation can also be forcefully triggered by pressing her special while airborne, which will then fully skip all of her airborne basic attacks. This is, in most cases, not ideal, and it is even worse when playing with Brimstone, as we now do less basics. However, there actually is a reason to use this sometimes. Casting her basic attack Annihilation will forcefully ground Ye Shunguang, and if there are 2 Sword Force stacks available, it will then consume them to deal massive damage and also grant 1 stack of Culmination. More on what that is in just a bit. If it is cast with fewer than 2 Sword Force stacks, however, then it will not consume any, nor will it grant Culmination, and it will deal significantly lower damage. Once Annihilation is used, there are 3 potential follow-ups, an EX special and 2 basics. Hoyo's descriptions are not quite accurate when it comes to the EX special in many of Ye Shunguang's basics, but we will cover this in detail later. For now, just know that using an EX special after Annihilation will consume 1 Sword Force or Culmination to deliver a grounded attack. If there is still 1 Sword Force stack left after her EX special, it can then be consumed to link into Sunderlight Maximum, a heavy-hitting 1-hit attack which we will simply call Maximum for short. The other follow-ups from Annihilation, those being the basic one, will depend on if there are any Sword Force stacks. If there is at least 1, it is consumed to cast Maximum, otherwise it will shortcut to the 3rd and final hit of her grounded basic attack string. This basic attack string is different from her regular out-of-state ones, being unique to the grounded Enlightened mind state. It is a 3-hit string, and these are the only attacks in the Enlightened mind state that do not have iframes. Additionally, if she has any Sword Force, she will replace her grounded basic 3 with her basic attack Skyward Ascent. After using Skyward Ascent, she will then become airborne. While there is at least 1 Sword Force stack, Ye Shunguang can use her EX special Soaring Light. Both the input and behavior of the skill changes depending on what she is doing. If you just press the EX special button while she is grounded, she will do an Enlightened mind state variant of her dodge chance special attack rather than Soaring Light. But I never really found myself in a situation where this would be worth using, as she is iframed during basically the entire state, so there is no reason to really ever dodge. But if you were to dodge, it is better than her dodge counter, because she doesn't have any while she is in her state. Instead, she can follow up her dodge directly with her Skyward Ascent afterwards. So, to get to the Soaring Light EX special, you would need to briefly hold the EX special button instead. That is, unless it is used after Annihilation or Maximum, where just pressing the button would be enough. Additionally, it will also almost always change Ye Shunguang's state when used. If she is airborne, she will be grounded afterwards, and if she is grounded, she will become airborne. Almost always, because if it is done after her basic attack Annihilation, she will remain grounded instead of changing her state. And this is the part where we have to talk about Hoyo's descriptions again, because for some reason they are often wrong, incomplete, misplaced or misleading, at least during the creator server beta. Anyway, in this case it is the last two, at least to some degree. Pause the video now and read this part on screen. Continue when done. So the thing is that Hoyo specifies the pressed as opposed to hold in the descriptions for Annihilation and Maximum, but this really should be in the description for the EX special Soaring Light, because it implies it is only usable after those two skills, when in reality it can be used at any time. Additionally, after using her EX special Soaring Light, Ye Shunguang can either follow up with Thunder Light Maximum if she ends in a grounded state, given that she has enough sword force that is, as covered before, or her aerial basic attack string. Which at least makes sense, as she will automatically use her basic attack Skyward Ascent afterwards anyway, since the first hit of said airborne basic string is only usable when first entering Enlightened Mind State. It will skip that and shortcut to the second part. But for some reason, none of that is mentioned in her EX special, and instead it is scattered throughout her basic attacks, while also being worded in a way that can be heavily misunderstood. If Ye Shunguang is grounded after using her EX special, she can always follow it up with Thunder Light Maximum if she has any sword force. Not only after using this basic attack, she can always do that. Use EX, be grounded, do Maximum afterwards. And she will also always become airborne after using her EX special when she is grounded, as she will always use her Skyward Ascent afterwards, not just after Maximum. So I hope that makes sense why I complain about this, but this really just should be part of her EX special and not part of her basic attacks. Anyway, let's continue. We also could simply keep holding down her EX special to rapidly consume multiple sword forces, up to 6 in total, but the total MV on this is really bad when compared to other MVs that only cost 1 or 2 sword force, so we don't ever want to do that. Well, unless you have Mindscape too, but more on that later. This is the point in time where we have to go back to her basic attacks. More specifically, we have to talk about the mysterious previously mentioned culmination. When using her Enlightened Mind State EX special, if you have any stacks of culmination, said EX special will not consume sword force and instead consume said culmination. Because culmination is kept at a maximum stack count of 1 at Mindscape 0, that also means after every use of her basic attack Annihilation, we get 1 free use of her EX special, and because it cannot stack, that also means we want to use her EX special in between each use of Annihilation. Lastly, if we hold down her EX special while we do not have any sword force stacks, she will then automatically cast her Enlightened Mind State ultimate, if the Enlightened Mind State was entered using Decibels, or her EX finisher instead if not. If we entered the Enlightened Mind State using her entry skill or with her ultimate but without spending Decibels, such as through Dialon, her ultimate will be replaced with her EX special finisher, and pressing either her ultimate or simply holding said EX special without any sword force will then deal massive damage and also exit the Enlightened Mind State after use. We will make use of this very frequently, and it can also be swap cancelled, which is something we should do because of its long animation. During the Enlightened Mind State, her chain attack becomes a stronger version of itself, even more so due to Veil vulnerability, but it also generates slightly less decibels. After using her chain attack, Ye Shunguang then becomes airborne. If the Enlightened Mind State was entered using 3000 decibels, she can then also finish the state by using her alternative ultimate, which deals honestly an insane amount of damage, but also has a really long animation, which is at least a little bit relevant for Brimstone, more on that later. This alternative ultimate could also be triggered by Dialen's ultimate conversion if used while Ye Shunguang is in her state, but because it takes a pretty long time to get back into her state after exiting it due to the low amount of resource point generation, we basically never want to do this, as we just really want Dialen's ultimate conversions to simply get back into the state. And I know this has been a lot, so let's summarize how she plays and works during the Enlightened mind state. First up, let's have a neat little table to show what skills change her state and when they do. Pause if you need to. Second, even though she has a lot of skills with a lot of text, her gameplay is really simple. We press basic attack. If we have a point of culmination, we briefly hold EX special to use it. Ideally, we use said EX special to become airborne, which means right after her Thunderlight maximum. If we are out of points, we either hold EX special or press ultimate to exit the state, and we can also use her chain attack during the Enlightened mind state due to the high MV, especially when paired with the Veil vulnerability multiplier. So effectively all we do is press basic, and EX twice, but we will talk more about that in the combo section. I also have a few more addendums I really want to talk about, actually it's quite a lot, because all of them are pretty important but fit best in a separate section. First I want to talk about the Barra cap. Again, those are the points you get when exceeding 6 Sword Force stacks, and they are kept at 3. Because they are kept at 3, that also means it is super important to not waste stacks. Let's have a look at this footage. We are currently at 5 Sword Force, and using her ultimate will now give us 6 stacks. Because 5 plus 6 is 11, and 11 is more than 6 plus 3, which is 9, after exiting the Enlightened mind state we are now left at 3 stacks, and that means we have just lost 2 Sword Force. Because Ye Shunguang is heavily reliant on Dialen and Zhao to frequently re-enter her state, her damage is non-existent outside of the Enlightened mind state, and she takes a very long time to accumulate enough resources to get back into the state all by herself, and because of that it is absolutely crucial to not waste any stacks. That also means you should always take care to not exceed 3 Sword Force when using her ultimate or entering the Enlightened mind state using Dialen's ultimate conversion. There's also something really annoying about Zhao, which I will talk in Zhao's guide about. Second, you can freely switch out of Ye Shunguang during her Enlightened mind state and her timer will pause. Do not be afraid to parry with other units or to refresh your buffs while she is in the Enlightened mind state. The timer will not tick down while she is off field. However, it should also be mentioned that switching out of her Enlightened mind state while airborne will have her automatically cast her basic attack Annihilation, and because of that, unless we switch back into her using a chain attack, she will also always be grounded upon switching. Third, if it looks like a duck, swims like a duck and quacks like a duck, then it is probably a duck. And Ye Shunguang's entry skill does pass the duck test. But it is an ugly duckling, so not quite a duck, more like a goose. Similar, but might bite you in the ass. Her entry skill is classified as a quick assist and also deals quick assist damage. The problem here arises on how it is triggered. While it will give you a stack of Astral Voice and trigger also Astra's Cadenza buff when switched into through a quick assist prompt, that is this little thing on the bottom right, it will not do that when activated by holding her basic attack button. Contrarily, however, even when holding her basic attack button to manually enter her state, Starlight Engine's quick assist condition will still trigger regardless. While this will mostly never be a problem or relevant, it is something that is, in my opinion, important to mention when playing with any of these, as you just will need to take care about how you trigger it by switching into her rather than using it manually. Fourth, Ye Shunguang will prioritize defensive assists over activating her entry skill upon switch in with a yellow flash. While this can make sense and be favorable in certain scenarios, such as Miasma Priest's parry onslaught, it can also be inconvenient when enemies are highly aggressive and might delay your Enlightened mind state simply due to that. Fifth, The wording, "this character is invulnerable while using this skill," appears 21 times within her kit, out of 26 skills. The only 5 skills in which this wording does not appear are her grounded basic attacks during her Enlightened mind state, her dodge and dash attack, as well as her out-of-state basics. Or in other words, Ye Shunguang is effectively invulnerable all the time. In fact, she has so much invulnerability to her kit that it is often more effective simply ignoring all of the enemy attack patterns and mechanics rather than actively playing them. Hello Priest. You cannot get hit anyway, and playing them would actively lower your score. That is concerning. When you actively have to try to get hit, your character might have a few too many iframes. 6th. Val vulnerability is only active as long as Ye Shunguang is not off-field and the Val vulnerability does not apply to her teammates. Even if the teammate's attack lands on the target while Val vulnerability is active, they will not gain the Val vulnerability's multiplier bonus. 7th. While we are at the topic of her Val vulnerability already, while Ether Val Verdict is active, the Val multiplier cannot change. This simply means we always want to make sure that stun damage multiplier changes, such as from Dialon, are applied and active before we enter her state. However, on the other hand, because the Val vulnerability multiplier cannot change while active, that also means we can still profit of that increase that technically has already expired. That is important during stun windows. Anyway, 8th, Ye Shunguang's miasma shield damage increase is tied to her anomaly build-up. Or in other words, if she cannot apply Honed Edge anomaly, she also does not gain the 50% purification bonus. As of right now, there is no instance in the game where this would directly apply, however Sobek does come very close to it. 9th and last, this is your spoiler warning, skip this part if you want to avoid spoilers about the new boss. You have been warned. If we are already talking about miasma shields, her ultimate shreds the miasma shields nearly instantly, with miasma shields granting various effects to the wielder, such as a 50% damage reduction and 10% increase in defense in the case of her own chill boss. A key point to playing her is to use her regular Decibel ultimate to shred any miasma shields. Please note that her Enlightened mind state ultimate, Miasma Shred, is comparably really bad and should preferably be used when the enemy does not have any miasma shields. Most of her damage comes from her basic attacks, but her ultimate and EX specials are up right next. Because of that, our skill priority will be her core skill and her basic attacks, into chain and EX special, into assist, and lastly dodge. We can leave her dodge at level 1, but I would probably advise to level all of her skills to at least level 11. Let's begin with Ye Shunguang's simplified combos, if one can call them that, while she is out of her state. If we have 60 energy available, we can use her EX special, then follow it up with her basic attack 4. Said basic 4 forces us into her dash attack, which then leads back into her basic 2, and from there we can finish her basic attack string. We can use the sequence as a filler in between her stances if we have nothing better to do. However, because we need 3 points to be able to enter her Enlightened stuns using Zhao, let's have a look at a full combat opener example. We begin combat with a full basic attack string, then switch to Zhao during her basic 4 and directly quick assist back into Ye Shunguang. We then continue with another basic attack string and weave in a dodge counter or special dodge if the fight allows for it, and then simply use her EX special once into her basic 4 and dash attack, and that's it. Now we have 6 stacks and we are good to go. Obviously, this is just an example, as every fight will play out differently and there are different ways and different combos, but you can do something very similar to this effectively in every fight, and all of this boils down to press basic attack. Now, with 6 points, we are in the Enlightened mind state, fantastic. So let's have a look at what we can do. In fact, we can do much more than shown here, but I personally found the most simplistic combo just simply doing the best throughout like all of the encounters I've had. So instead of overcomplicating things, let's go with this one. We begin by entering her Enlightened mind state using either her ultimate or through her entry skill. be it by switching her in or holding her basic attack. We follow up by pressing her basic attack 4 times, then shortly hold her EX special during her ground slash to go back airborne, and then we now press basic thrice more, then hold her EX special down until we finish the state. It really is all that simple. Lastly, I will not really go too deep into this because it is very similar to the first combo but with 6 EX specials attached at the end, and the last EX special is used before her Sunderlight maximum due to time reasons, but if you plan on pulling out her Mindscape too, this is the combo you are looking for. And with that said, let's have a look at how these combos actually look in a real combat scenario. As already seen in the combo section, we start exactly like that, one full basic string into a quick switch swap back into Zhao and another basic string. I then continue with 3 basics into her EX special and dodge the last rockets right after. This leaves me at 6 full Sword Force stacks. I quickly switch to Dial-In, cast her EX special 3 times to apply the stun damage multiplier and King of the Summit, quickly switch to Zhao to cast her EX special to trigger the Quick Assist and hence also apply Astral Voice buff, then use the Quick Assist prompt into Ye Shunguang. Now comes the important part. We are at nearly 2000 decibels and Ye Shunguang will break his legs very fast. Because of that, we want to make sure we only focus on one leg for her very first state. This is unfortunately pretty RNG heavy, and due to the large AoE she does, I do in fact impair 2 legs here. This is far from ideal and should be a full reset usually, but because of how broken she is, it does not actually matter. I then swap cancel her EX finisher into Dial-In and cast 1 EX special into her health basic, which I swap cancel because we do not need the conversion point and only want the days. Instead, I want to preserve her points and energy for a little bit later. Our goal here is to break 1 more leg to get UCC into stun while Ye Shunguang is in her Enlightened mind state. I then quickly switch to Ye Shunguang, use her Decibel ultimate, then keep W and A pressed to move her towards the next unbroken leg. 1 small combo does the trick, so I swap cancel her upwards EX after the maximum slash, then retrigger stun using Dial-In EX. This will also refresh King of the Summit. I cancel the chain into Annihilation and then accidentally cape her EX pressed for too long, but again it doesn't really matter. I switch out of it, retrigger the stun prompt using Dial-In and select again Ye Shunguang. I then finish the stun window with her alternative ultimate. Point being, as you can also see right in the footage right now, not only is Ye Shunguang pretty easy to play, you can also do so many things wrong and still kill. Well, at least versus UCC that is. Could I have shown you a much cleaner run? Yes. But that would not drive my point home as much as this run does. I waste a lot of stacks, a lot of decibels from leg breaks and generally do not play clean here at all. And despite all of this, I still killed. So with that said, I guess let's talk about her main and substats first, as they do have implications for her weapons, sets and Mindscapes. And if you're looking for a much cleaner run, watch the pre-skill at the end. Ye Shunguang's main stats will change depending on the boss you fight, because her own shill boss, Primordial Nightmare, name censor to avoid spoilers, only has a base defense of 476, which is half of other bosses' defense. Both defense shred and pen ratio are inherently a much worse choice. That also means if you care about an ideal damage output, you will want to change not only your main stats but also disk drives depending on the boss you fight. Given she is using her signature or any other crit damage heavy weapon such as Heartstring Nocturne, Severed Innocence or Myriad Eclipse for example against a normal defense target such as the Defiler, we are looking at attack percent in slot 4, pen ratio in slot 5 and again attack percent in slot 6. However, crit damage in slot 4 is not really too far behind attack and is also a valid choice. It is a little bit more nuanced though. Because it should also be mentioned that in a lot of fights, such as Defiler, her own shill boss, Pompey, UCC and even the Thrall, they all provide a lot of crit damage from their boss mechanics. and that makes attack percent the overall better choice in basically every single fight, even if you don't have Dial Signature. But what if you are going versus the Primordial Nightmare, her own chill boss, with only half the defense of other bosses? Well, in that case, crit damage in slot 4, attack percent in slot 5 and 6 would be her best choices. But again, that is also only the case when not accounting for the boss's mechanics. But since it is literally quite impossible to fight the boss without its inherent mechanics, it will provide you with 60% crit damage whether you want or not. You will get those and you will like them. Because of that, the literally best choice we have is quite literally attack percent in all 3 slots. However, the differences here are not too big and physical damage in slot 5 can be a good choice as well. So honestly, at least for this part, choose whatever has better substats. So to summarize, in an ideal world versus the Primordial Nightmare, we ideally want attack percent in all 3 slots, and versus any other boss, we want attack percent in slot 4, pen ratio in slot 5, and attack percent in slot 6. If you run Brimstone on her or any other non-crit weapon, you are looking at crit damage in slot 4, pen ratio in slot 5, and attack percent in slot 6. And if you have been observant, you might have noticed that her disk drives changed in between all of those calculations as well. So let's talk about them. Yet again, we will have different set choices for different bosses. While the new set White Water Ballad is Ye Shunguang's best 4-piece choice in every single case but one, more on that later, her best 2-piece may vary. With pen ratio in slot 5 and when not against her own chill boss, a 2-piece Puffer Electro is her best in slot choice. However, the difference between Puffer and other 2-piece choices such as Branch and Blade Song, Woodpecker, Astral Voice, Hormone Punk or also Fanged Metal is pretty small, and as we will see later on, a single substat roll can push any of these above a 2-piece Puffer Electro. When against her own chill boss, however, all other options not named Puffer Electro become better than a 2-piece Puffer with yet again a very small difference between them. Because of the small difference between any of those, personally I would recommend either a 2-piece Woodpecker if you are in need of more crit rate for some reason, or a 2-piece Branch and Blade Song with the latter having the highest damage potential. TLDR being, regardless of the boss you fight, Puffer and Branch and Blade are often very even or at the very least close to each other, and hence choose whatever has better substats, but if you have even substats, you might want to adjust your 2-piece sets depending on the fight. Speaking of substats already, focus on crit rate first and foremost until 100% in combat, then attack percent or crit damage, and lastly flat pen and flat attack. Whether you prefer attack percent or crit damage as your substat will depend on your build and is usually the opposite of your slot 4 main stat. Since she gains 30% crit rate in combat from her core passive as well as 20% from the 4-piece White Water Ballad, that also means we are looking at a maximum of 50% crit rate in the stat screen. Ye Shunguang's best weapon is, to hopefully nobody's surprise, her own signature Cloud Weave Radiance. Her next best choice is the R5 version of Brimstone, however, coming pretty close to her own signature in performance, with an R1 Brimstone being the best free-to-play weapon she has. If you have Severed Innocence, it is her next best non-R5 weapon she has, and if you are a good player and you can weave in the occasional special every 30 seconds, you might be able to maintain 2 stacks on it. For the sake of simplicity of playing her, however, I went with 1 stack, but you can get 2. Heartstring Nocturne, Steel Cushion and Myriad are all around 15 to 17% behind her signature, and anything after that is, well, after that. I do want to mention that Cordis Germina is impossible to build with Ye Shunguang's own 4-piece disk drive set. Again, White Water Ballad. You literally will overcap on crit rate whether you want it or not, and that also means if this is the only choice you have for whatever weird reason, you instead would want to build a 4-piece Puffer Electro. Otherwise, Cordis is probably the worst choice she has, and I would highly recommend choosing literally anything else but this weapon. Whether you fight versus her own boss or Defiler or any other boss, her weapons don't really change, so either use her signature, Brimstone or Severed Innocence. Also, I do want to say for a Void Hunter, her weapon choices are actually really good. Anyway, personal opinion over, let's talk about her Mindscapes. Her Mindscapes are pretty okay-ish good. Her M1 grants a flat out 10% damage bonus, 20% defense threat, and also allows you to start combat with 6 resource points, which basically means you get to use one Enlightened mind state right off the bat. Whether this additional state actually results in an additional Enlightened mind state over the course of the fight will depend on quite a few variables, and hence this Mindscape can perform better or worse, look at the number which you like more. As a very important side note, for some reason there is the stigma going around that any amount of defense threat means that pen ratio instantly becomes completely and utterly unusable. That is not true. The breakpoint for most characters is at around 35% defense threat at 100% uptime for the whole entire kit. And this is true for Ye Shunguang as well. Pen ratio is still her best choice at Mindscape 1, well again unless you are versus her own chill boss. However, it should also be mentioned that she will release with her own chill buff in Deadly Assault, surprise, which conveniently provides also 15% defense threat, and turns out 20% from her Mindscape 1 plus 15% equals 35%, and that means pen ratio is at least while this buff lasts a worse choice. Her Mindscape 2 slightly changes her rotation, allowing you to end it with 6 full EX specials, and all of her state EX specials gain an additional 40% death threat. Pretty good Mindscape. Also, you can overstack a lot more now, which means this Mindscape also comes with a lot of good quality of life change. Her M3 and her M5 exist as per usual, and her Mindscape 4 is your $800 fix to make effective use of the 200% stun damage multipliers with Dialin in the team. The additional 1000 decibels will not really give you an additional decibel ultimate in most fights, but in some fights such as UCC that can feed decibels to her, this can actually be really good, and I can actually also see this doing quite its work versus Priest. In the vacuum, however, this Mindscape does not really do too much. And lastly, her Mindscape 6 is okay. It's not a bad M6, but it is not really the best either. Effectively, we replace 4 EX finishers with her finisher ultimate, which is a raw 18k MV gain, and both of those now also deal additional damage, so not the worst Mindscape, but also not her best. Hello, good morning. Post-editing review, I just woke up, the video goes live in 8 hours, and they just changed her Mindscape too. So, here on screen is the new effect of what it does, and also, you know, the new calculations for everything. I hope I can just slap this in because we have no time to actually re-render the video. Yeah, sorry for that. Peace. M2 and M6 is better now. Anyway, I would recommend her Mindscape 2 over her Mindscape 1 over her signature. If you do not have her Brimstone at R3 or higher, I would recommend her signature over anything else. So, let's talk about her teams. Ye Shunguang's best team is with Dialin and Zhao, and no other team can perform on the same level as those two can. Dialin can provide direct access to her Enlightened mind state at least thrice and up to 5 times per fight, and Zhao can provide up to 12 Sword Force stacks per fight as well, simply by switching into her, all while none of them need any meaningful field time. Astra will work as the best replacement for either Dialin or Zhao, requiring close to no field time while also buffing the team, and with frequent access to additional chain attacks, Astra can not only help out with decibel generation, but given Ye Shunguang's high chain attack multipliers also contribute a good chunk of damage. However, you will still notice a difference in performance. Given Seed can work as a sub DPS and pseudo support, again while not on the same level as Ye Shunguang's best team, this team is played differently in a way that both feels more engaging and can also perform surprisingly well. Just make sure to use Seed's EX special once every 40 seconds to maintain her buffs. Also, stun windows now suddenly matter a little bit more due to Seed being able to actually make use out of them. If you don't have Dialin, both Trigger and Jifufu can do as well. Both of them only require a low amount of heal time to do their jobs effectively, and with Jifufu's Decibel refund she can help an ultimate uptime. Especially as Ye Shunguang has 2 ultimates as well, effectively refunding 600 decibels for every decibel ultimate used. However, I personally found Trigger to be more consistent and also a little bit better than Jifufu. If you are free to play or you are simply a new player and you don't have any of the previously mentioned units except Zhao, because well, Zhao is free to obtain, Nicole can do really well. However, maintaining Nicole's death shred has always been annoying and more on the difficult side before, and with Ye Shunguang this does not really become easier. However, after her Sunderlight maximum, it is a good time to switch out of her and simply reapply Nicole's death shred. So, let's do something special. I want to talk a little bit about her matchups. Please note that these are my own opinions from playing versus those, and yours can differ, and that is okay. All of her matchups can essentially be divided into 2 categories: favorable and unfavorable. Fights that have long or frequent intermission phases, such as Marionettes or Thrall, are generally unfavorable to her, as she wants to be within her state as long but also as often as possible, requiring you to find specific routes to play around these. While well doable for above average players, you might find yourself scoring lower than expected versus otherwise relatively easy bosses due to that. Fiend is generally favored in terms of routing as well as its physical weakness, but it also has no mechanics to support her damage, as those are anomaly bosses and hence do play into anomaly buffs. Regardless of which boss you fight, however, due to her effectively always being invulnerable, you also can ignore 90% of the boss's mechanics and do just fine. There are certain exceptions of course, such as UCC's leg breaks, Defiler's parry onslaught for 48 crit damage, or her intermission, but you get the point I want to make. Let's begin with UCC, which is probably the easiest matchup outside of her own chill boss, and also the one which you probably can kill simply very easily. You can ignore literally everything he does because we don't get hit anyway. Instead, we want to focus on getting as many leg breaks as possible, as each one does not only deal a good chunk of damage, but also provides us with a crit damage buff and 1000 decibels. Due to her insanely high damage profile and large AoE that is surprisingly easy, so we primarily need to play around her leg targeting. While UCC is basically always a somewhat RNG dependent boss, simply holding down her W and A movement key during the entirety of her Enlightened state makes it much more consistent, making her slowly walk around clockwise. It should be noted that it is also easy to waste decibels here, but it still plays heavily into her favor. Additionally, it can be of advantage to use double chain attacks on her during the Enlightened mind state, as the damage they do is simply extremely high, while also providing additional decibels. As a last side note, her Enlightened mind state can position you extremely far away from UCC, to the point where he is fully out of range. This results in you needing to quite literally manually walk back to him, losing a lot of time. Next up is Priest. Surprisingly, Ye Shunguang can score evenly or possibly simply outperform Ye Zhuan in this fight. This is partially also due to the DA buff not being that great for Ye Zhuan, but Ye Shunguang buffs is also very good of course. Personally, I've gotten the highest scores by straight up ignoring literally, well, all of its mechanics outside of like 1 or 2 parries during the onslaught for like a little bit additional decibels, and there are only 2 important exceptions to this. Ideally, we are looking for 1 parry early on to stun just slightly faster, to line up team resources, and secondly, the miasma phase of course, because we can simply, well, not ignore it. Generally, Priest is a pretty easy matchup, partially also due to Ye Shunguang's high damage versus miasma shields. She does remove them extremely quickly after all, but I found it still a very demanding fight to actually kill at Mindscape 0. But it was a cool fight. Defiler is one of those bosses where you see whether or not her first move is the spin to win parry thing, and if it isn't, you reset until it is. Then we parry until we have the full crit damage buff and simply ignore whatever it wants to do for the rest of the fight. Well, of course we have to shoot her down and we also have to play the shield wall, but while Defiler has some very annoying time wasting intermissions, Ye Shunguang's states line up relatively well for this fight to be favorable. Defiler also has a low base stun damage multiplier, which means Ye Shunguang isn't at risk of overcapping her Veil vulnerability, especially when run with Dialin, which can work in her favor. Despite Fiend being an anomaly boss, Ye Shunguang can do pretty well here. It should be mentioned that her state management is important here, as Fiend will go into intermission after the first stun at around 2 minutes, and you do want to make sure to not be inside your state here, or worse, use your ultimate and hit absolutely nothing but thin air, because Fiend decides to jump back to his pedestal looking and laughing at you like the little peasant you are, having fully wasted your just most impactful ability. Otherwise, though, this fight really does not have much to it. We can just ignore literally all of its attacks, quite literally, and score surprisingly well. Also, Wanderer, I don't really have anything to say about Wanderer. You just ignore everything and still at least get like 30 to 35k, which is really good for an attack character. But anyway. Marionettes was for me the most annoying fight out of all. Lining up her Enlightened mind state with her 3 intermissions is well possible, but it does require some planning, because her time in this state is limited and so is the amount of times she gets it. Having to waste time during it while they are airborne and invulnerable is highly annoying and detrimental to the final score. Because we need to clear the Marionette doubles during the intermission, and both Zhao and Dialin being unable to do so reliably means we ideally want to on-field Ye Shunguang. On this field type needs to be out of state to preserve resources and hence damage. While possible, I personally found this fight annoying and more on the unfavorable side due to the amount of planning it needs, but she can score just still well enough. On a personal side note, that means my, personal opinion, because I personally find her very boring to play by herself, often being able to simply ignore and not interact with any of the enemy mechanics. Marionettes to me was the most engaging fight, because you actually have to engage with the enemy mechanics rather than just pressing left click for 180 seconds straight. And that leaves us with her own personal chill boss, the Primordial Nightmare. Spoiler warning, I will show footage, and if you would like to avoid any and all spoilers about this fight, please skip this part. You have been warned. The Primordial Nightmare is her personal shill boss and by far the easiest matchup she has outside of UCC. Ye Shunguang excels in quickly clearing miasma shields, and this boss's mechanics is simply to put up frequent miasma shields. Each time this boss enters or leaves the miasma shield, you will gain a crit damage bonus. It is important to mention that this boss's miasma shield grants a 50% damage reduction and a 10% defense increase while up, so it is important to get rid of it as soon as possible. Because her Decibel ultimate removes basically the entire shield near instantly, it is recommended to save it for this purpose. Dialin will also massively help here, as she can trigger Ye Shunguang's Decibel ultimate without needing said decibels. About 20 seconds into the fight, this boss will do a quick 4-part attack string during which we cannot act outside of switching or dodging. Parrying this boss's attacks 4 times in a row will break the control skill, granting 2000 performance points and inflicting shutdown for a large chunk of damage. The catch here, you do not have any indicators, so you need to practice the timings here a little bit. But aside from that, when playing with Ye Shunguang, you do not have any mechanics you need to care about for the rest of the fight. You execute your combos over and over again, and that's effectively it. It is a very cinematic fight, which is really cool and engaging when you play literally anything else but Ye Shunguang. This fight is surprisingly pretty hard for her to kill on her release, because it has a massive 216 million HP, and while I would like to recommend you to try this fight with any other unit not named Ye Shunguang, because of that massive HP score, do not necessarily expect a great score at the end, but it's a really cool fight, it's fun. And with that said, let's end the video with her pros and cons. I'll start off with a hot take here. In my opinion, Ye Shunguang is extremely boring to play. Not only in terms of her own playstyle, but also because of her very optimal way of playing, simply often being to not engage with enemy mechanics. That doesn't mean that she cannot be fun for you and that some fights can still be really fun, but Ye Shunguang in itself in a vacuum I just find not that fun. I suppose, however, this can also be a positive, depending on your point of view, because it also means that she is extremely simple to play despite having a lot of text in her kit. Her attacks lack a lot of impact in my opinion, and she is heavily carried by her, to be fair, really cool VFX. On the positive side, however, she is extremely strong into most matchups, effortlessly clearing basically every single boss in the entire game, even Wandering Hunter. With a little practice and a few resets, she can also pretty easily kill, maybe her own boss, but especially UCC. And that honestly with a pretty low investment team as well. Speaking of teams, there is a very clear difference between her best team, that being Dialin and Zhao, and every other team. Astra is probably Zhao's best replacement she has, and while she can still score extremely well, Astra is also behind Zhao. On the other hand, while she does not have many teams, she does have a handful of teams, which all play differently, which at least in my opinion is pretty cool. Her weapon choices are surprisingly good for a Void Hunter, even more so if you have either Severed Innocence or R5 Brimstone. Her Mindscapes are okay, they are good but not outstanding. And lastly, given how well she performs in basically every single fight, she might be the strongest unit they have released up until now. Or at the very least, she is even up with Miyabi, well, when she was released. Personally, I stand by it, I think that Ye Shunguang is better. Anyway, addendum and outro. So, the question is, should you pull? Well, given how I just said that she is probably the strongest unit they have ever released, at least as of right now and up until then, probably. Like, instead of answering whether or not you should pull, I would like to touch upon the topic of how easy it is to anti-shill her. You know, like Miyabi, to the point of where she can barely clear. In my opinion, it is pretty difficult to directly anti-shill her. Yes, they could obviously implement a mechanic outside of increases defense by 300% but goes back to normal during stun windows. Also, there are now 7 stun windows, and also here's a 40% physical resistance. But in my opinion, while something like this is of course always a possibility, it is much easier for them to nerf the characters and mechanics she relies upon rather than directly anti-shilling her kit. She is heavily reliant on being in her state as much as possible, and the best way to get into the state is through Dialin and Zhao. Both of them rely on a certain degree on miasma shields, as breaking said miasma shields will refund a lot of resources. This makes it easier for Dialin and Zhao to gain back their resources, which in turn simply means more enlightened mind states for Ye Shunguang. In the end, it is impossible to predict the future, and Toyo will find a way to tune her down and anti-shill her when they want to. Which means goodbye miasma shields and you will notice a heavy drop. Anyway, but just as Miyabi has served well for over half a year and Yi Zhuan will serve well for over half a year, we can also expect Ye Shunguang to do quite well for a while. So, given her current power level and ease of play, I think it would be disingenuous towards any of you to tell you to skip. She will clear all and every content for you effortlessly by pressing one button on your mouse, and she will do so for a while. But she can also still be power crept and anti-shilled whenever Hoyo decides to do so, and that is true for every unit, and I just want you to be aware of that. When Miyabi released, it was like, oh, I can clear with Miyabi everything for the rest of my life, and that's just not a thing, right? Even if she is very strong right now, she will not be forever. And with that said, we are at the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. Before I leave you with like 2 or 3 showcases, I don't know yet, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment on your thoughts on Ye Shunguang and join the Discord. A special thanks to my YouTube and Patreon members who make this content possible. If you wish to support me, you will find a link to my Patreon in the description, or click the join button right below this video. And as always, I appreciate all of you, thank you so much for sticking around for over an hour up until now, and I wish you a great day. Peace!
shot from a jet, but in your face. 2 blocks to the land, one of your waist. 3 decades.